Okay, it's raining outside, so that might make a little extra noise, but hopefully you can hear me. I turned the wipers off and the fan, so hopefully that'll help. What I'd like to talk about is, today, two things. The burden of proof and the definition of God. I watched a video on YouTube last night, two videos actually. One of them was by a pastor who was just sort of a moron. He was interesting to listen to. He was very much stuck in his own way of thinking. But he and this other guy were both talking on the topic of how to discuss with atheists, how to have a conversation with atheists. Well, anyway, the more reasonable one was saying, saying to Christians, don't be afraid to say you don't have an answer. Be reasonable when you talk to an atheist. Try to get them to explain their reasons for their belief. Ask them questions, and if they corner you on something, just say, so what? The God of the Old Testament is an asshole. He's violent. He's petty. He's jealous. He's a monster. Just say, so what? So? What does that mean? Big deal. Or, Anyway, he was a reasonable person, but one of the things that he did say, which is entirely false, is that what you should do is try to focus the argument on the atheists justifying their beliefs and explaining why they don't have this belief, or why they don't believe in God, or why they believe God doesn't exist. And that's precisely the only way that a theist is ever going to win that discussion with an atheist. It's because the only way to win for a theist is for them to assume that their case is true and that you have to falsify them. This is impossible for starters. It's impossible to falsify a negative. So they've won just by assuming that they're true. Because you can't prove a negative. There's no way to prove that in all the world, a universal negative anyway, in all the world there are no purple swans. There's no way to disprove it. It can only be proven if you find a purple swan. But failing to find a purple swan, or showing that a purple swan isn't in this region, however vast, you still have not succeeded in showing that there is no purple swan anywhere in all of the world. Or in all the world. So that's the number one reason why it's an illicit move, and it's a way for them to so-called win. But what it's basically doing is failing to understand that atheism isn't a religion. It isn't even a set of beliefs. It isn't even a belief. It's a lack of a belief. It's a lack of one belief. So while Christians like to turn atheism into a religion, in their discussions to falsify it and to try to, I shouldn't say the word falsify. Christians and religious people in general like to treat atheism as if it were a religion, with absolutely no justification for doing so, because I guess they look at atheists and go, oh, they think similarly, and there are certain things that most of them would believe, so it's a religion. I don't know why they want to use this tactic. I guess they want to say that they want to bring it down to their level. It really seems like they either can't think on any level other than faith-based belief and religious groupthink, or they want to unify their own weaknesses that are so blatant with atheism. They want to give atheism all the flaws of religion, and therefore say, well, you're choosing between essentially equal things, you might as well choose religion. This is a move you must resist at all costs. Atheism is not a religion. It's the lack of a single belief. It's the lack of the belief that there is a God. If you do not believe that there's a God, you're an atheist. If you're not sure that there's a God, you're an atheist. An atheist is someone who doesn't believe. You have to actually believe to leave the category of atheist. So, it usually gets confused with Gnostic and agnostic. Anyone who's Gnostic thinks they know that what they believe is true. For instance, a Christian who believes that they've reasoned their way to God is a Gnostic theist, or believes that they have proof or that it's demonstrable. A Christian who believes solely on faith is an agnostic theist. They don't believe that they know what they believe. They just believe it. Similarly, you can be a Gnostic atheist or an agnostic atheist. So, the first thing that you have to do is recognize that the burden of proof is on the theist to prove their pretty crazy belief that there is a certain being named God. And that comes to the first point, and probably the most important point, which is, and I'd seen Matt Dillahunty do this often on Atheist Experience, and it seems so strange. He asks them to define what they mean by God. It seems so strange because there's this really strong religious substrate. Okay, just making sure it's recording and I didn't get interrupted. There's this really strong religious substrate that religion likes to draw upon to have a discussion about God. The Bible permutates culture, our movies, our history, our art, our mythology is all tied up with Christian religion, and they use that to their advantage. So they don't. A lot of things don't have to be explained or said, and when you have to explain or say the things that are sort of implicitly understood, you end up realizing that they are making claims. They aren't just talking about something that actually exists. They're talking about a fictional character. And the thing is, you can say anything you want to about a fictional character, first of all, defining your terms when you begin a discussion is just a good point in any kind of debate or any kind of discussion. It's proper methodology for debate. Secondly, this is even worse in the case of God, where it's all the more necessary to define your terms because God is not, there's no God around for us to shape our notion of what God is supposed to be. There's no God that's appearing. We're like, well, it's like the God that appeared. It's like when you talk about gazelles, you can point to gazelles. When you talk about abacuses, you can look at an abacus, and there's a point of reference for facts about abacuses. And while you may have one or another view on an abacus, the abacus is right there. Even something abstract like justice, there are actual acts of justice and injustice in the world that you can point to that give us a point of reference to define it in a sort of natural way. There is no such thing for God. There are no gods, and if there are gods, certainly there are no gods that appear. Otherwise, the whole question of atheism would be, there would be no question of atheism. So, since there are no gods, you need to ask them what they mean when they are talking about the fictional character in their head. They need to say, I believe in an old man who lives in the clouds. Or they need to say something more sophisticated than that. But whatever they say, you then have a point of reference to say, well, why do you believe that? What's your reason to believe that? And do the things that make sense. And let me show you why it does make sense for the burden of proof to be reversed on atheists. If you say, I don't believe in God, and they could say, what do you mean by God? That's a valid question. You could say, a supernatural being, a creator of the universe that's a personal being, an intelligence without body. You could name a lot of these things, and then they would say, well, why don't you believe in that? Why don't you have that belief? And the answer is very simple and very short, which is why it doesn't make sense to reverse the burden of proof. There's no evidence for it. And then they can say, well, what do you mean there's no evidence? What do you mean? But the lack of evidence is not something you have to explain. It's not your job as an atheist to go through all of everything and point to the non-evidence for God that exists everywhere. So, that's my advice, and good luck and good headhunting, sniping off the Christians.